So I'm now joined by the Chief Constable for Derbyshire Constabulary, Rachel Swan. I'm really glad you can join us today because we have so many questions around this priority, and residents from all over Derby and Derbyshire have sent in some questions. So let's get things started. Sure. So question number one is from a resident in South Derbyshire. If a neighbour is constantly using cannabis and the smell is filling your garden and house, causing you not to want to go into the garden, how do the police react to this? Please note that I have reported this issue numerous times.
Okay, I'll start off by saying, we absolutely do recognise that there is a lot of concern within the communities for substance misuse. And I say substance misuse because I probably am saying alcohol and drugs. Appreciating we're specifically talking about drugs. And often people are concerned around the links of drugs to criminality and antisocial behaviour. So first, I want to say that, you've obviously heard from ACC Abdi, tackling drugs, dealing with the results of substance misuse is something that the force very much focuses on and focuses on with partners. So I just want to start by giving that first reassurance. So in relation to this from South Derbyshire, we did, obviously we've been privy to some more detail around this. We did recently receive a similar report to this. And in that instance, the officers attended the address concerned where it was reported the behaviour was taking place. And they spoke to the occupant who allowed them to go in, they assessed the address. There was no noticeable odours or noticeable substances there. And so, in that instance, they were happy that there was no use of drugs at that time that we attended. And in that instance, certainly we worked with environmental health and the local council to make them aware of it. But what I would say to people is you do need to continue to report it because, in that instance, the person was happy to let us in and in other circumstances, they're not. And what we tend to do is we build up a picture. We look at what intelligence and information we've got on the systems, and where we can, we take positive action. And that could include obtaining a warrant to go and search the address. And that's something that we actually do on a really frequent basis within the force on a regular basis. So we need people to continue to encourage to report it, even if they think it's not going to go anywhere. It might not go anywhere in that first instance, but it might go further on other instances, and it helps us build up that picture of what is happening within that area, and is there an issue with drugs and indeed drug supply within that location.
So what would your message be to this particular resident? Because they end this with, they've reported it numerous times. Do they continue to report it as
Yes,
you're
please.
painting that picture, pulling together that picture? Because for them, it might feel like, well, I feel like nothing's being done.
Yeah, so continue to report it, but also speak to their local Safer Neighbourhood team because they may be able to say to them, oh, actually, we have actioned this or we've done this with this area. So they may be able to give them some feedback on that matter.
Okay. And in terms of the Safer Neighbourhood team, for residents that don't know, if you go onto Derbyshire Constabulary's website and visit the Your Area page, you can put in your postcode to understand who your S&T team are. So as the Chief has said, please also report that to the S&T. But if you don't know who they are, then you can go onto that area on the website and that'll show you who your S&T team are, from police officers, PCSOs, and everyone who makes up that team locally alongside their contact details. Thank you very much for that answer. And hopefully the resident listening will get in touch again. Question number 2 is from a resident from Erewash. I've lived in Ilkeston for over 20 years. And it has never felt as unsafe as it does now. What are the police doing about the drug issues that seem to be bringing so many issues to the town centre?
Yeah, this is something I'm aware of because obviously I get updates from my local policing unit inspectors, and certainly I'm aware that there has been a lot of concerns around antisocial behaviour in the town centre. So forgive me because I'm going to refer to my notes for some numbers. So far in 2025, and these figures were prepared for me a couple of weeks ago, officers in Ilkeston have carried out 41 seizures of drugs classed as personal use. They've recorded and investigated 11 offences of possession with intent to supply, so not just personal use, I mean supply. And they've recorded and investigated 9 offences of imported drugs. So kind of gives you an indication of we're looking at not just personal use, but actually who's supplying it and who's bringing it into that location to do it, so that we tackle it at all levels. And these investigations have led to 52 positive outcomes. Some investigations are still live, so we need to bear that in mind because they can take a while to get to court, for example. During that time as well, officers have conducted 96 stop searches around these, specifically around Section 23 of the Misuse of Drugs Act. So again, it demonstrates we're proactively trying to identify these offences.
Yes.
And drugs have been found during 28% of those searches. So we're getting a high return rate on that. We are always looking to develop intelligence. And I'm probably repeating what we said in the last question, but we're really keen to hear from anybody who has that intelligence, because as you can see, we absolutely do take action from low-level sort of personal use through to people importing. And we can only do that with the help of the public, giving us that intelligence to enable us to do these proactive and positive results.
And I think it's the challenge, isn't it? Because there's a lot of work that is happening in regards to this space, listening to the figures that you've shared with us. But how do we change that feeling of not just perception, because in some cases it's perception, but sometimes it's real strength of feeling that people feel unsafe going into those city centres or those town centres anymore. And I know there's a lot of work that happens with partners, whether that's the town council or whether that's parishes. There are a number of partners who care about making sure that residents can go into the centres and feel safe. I don't know, how do you think we can do that more? Do we need to be shouting more about the positive outcomes that we are seeing at the force to give people confidence? Because it sounds like there's a lot going on.
Yeah, it does,
I don't know if people know about that.
No, so I mean, gosh, there's a wide range of things that you touch on really around, people's feelings of safety. Part of their feelings of safety is seeing a visible jacket, and that can be police or it can be council wardens, for example. So there's part around making sure we've got a visible presence there, which is, we've talked about before, and I'll probably talk about later, where we do hotspot patrolling, where we go in specific locations where we know the public will be so that they can see us there. There is also always needing to continue to talk about positive results. And I am just going to give a plug for our Instagram account, because if you do follow our Instagram account, it does give a lot of updates in terms of action that we've taken. And there's been some on there recently in terms of drugs arrests and warrants that we've done. And I would encourage people to look at that, because it does show you the positive action that we're doing. But I think there are other feelings that affect safety. So physical, the aspect in terms of the physical environment can definitely have an impact on that. And there's some of the things that we work with partners around designing out crime. Even effective lighting makes people feel safer. So
yes,
a lot of work that is in partnership. But I did want to just to reiterate that in terms of this particular issue, it is something that we're aware of and we're being very proactive trying to tackle it.
Okay. We have a third question here from a resident in Derbyshire Dales. Will the PCC and Derbyshire Constabulary urge the government to decriminalise possession of drugs for personal use, as has happened in Portugal and elsewhere, in order to reduce petty crime related to drug addiction, and in both ways release very large numbers of police to concentrate their efforts on bringing other types of offenders to justice? So I guess from a constabulary's point of view, where do we sit within that? So I know I've had questions around this through casework myself, actually. And we obviously operate still in the parameters of the law in this country until that is otherwise. But the questions are to the chief, so I will.
Chief and the commissioner, I believe.
I saw that, so I'm going to put the chief first, and then from an operational point of view, go with that, and then.
So from an operational point of view, if the law changes, we will change to work within the law, but the law is as it is, and we will continue to do that. Just in relation to that, though, around certain offences where people are found with drugs in certain circumstances, based on a number of factors, we do have the ability to operate discretion. So we can use out-of-court resolutions so that individuals aren't unnecessarily put within the criminal justice system, but actually go through a variety of pathways to receive support to prevent further misuse of drugs, for example, so that they can understand the consequences of their actions. And we work alongside partner agencies to do it, which again is preventative rather than punitive. But really, if we go back to my previous answer, importation, serious offences, supply, that's not those things. This is around certain circumstances and personal use. Mm-hmm. And we do see drugs and substance misuse, as I said at the start, being at the centre of a lot of crime. And we do see it linked to things like antisocial behaviour as well. So hence, whilst we will tackle antisocial behaviour, we'll also tackle some of the underlying causes and, work with partners to deal with the substance misuse that there is.
Yeah. I think from my perspective, I will definitely take this away and escalate it to the relevant government ministers in regards to what the appetite is from the government in terms of exploring what that looks like. It's not something that I have delved into, and it doesn't come up regularly, but it has been raised a few times. So it is an area of work where I think a lot of work needs to be done to understand what that would look like for the UK and whether there's even an appetite for that from a government. And that definitely sits above my decision making. But as they said, it's around us having that conversation with government and seeing what the government's appetite is for that. And I am able to escalate the residents' question to the relevant people to see what that looks like. Now we have a question from Chesterfield. Question 4. Staveley still has a large drug problem, which means antisocial behaviour becomes part of the issue. Do you have plans to make Staveley a better place to live?
So just to reassure that officers are taking a proactive and community-focused approach in terms of tackling drug-related issues in Staveley. So there are regular patrols which are in place to disrupt criminal activity and to provide reassurance for residents, referring to earlier questions. Officers are conducting regular drop-in sessions as well at community hubs because, we want people to come and speak to us because clearly the person giving this question, is talking about drugs issues, but the link to antisocial behaviour and wanting it to be a better place to live. So, that is definitely something our Safer Neighbourhood teams would want to speak to you about, so we can understand. Part of the hubs is to strengthen engagement, and the other bit is a safe space for people to come and speak to us.
Yes.
We're also targeting the issue at its root cause by identifying and pursuing those involved in the supply, and they're closely working with the local council on a number of closure orders to use on those identified suspects who often will carry out a warrant, but then closure order on maybe addresses that they live at, etc. So we try to use a range of things with our partners to tackle some of the issues. There's been several individuals who've been charged and they're expecting sentences in the coming weeks. The local PCSOs try to provide a lot more visibility and put leaflets out and things like that to try to encourage people in terms of reporting to us, and also a lot of proactive efforts to deter antisocial behaviour, which may or may not be connected to the drugs. But again, just some reassurance, this is something that the Safer Neighbourhood team at Staveley know about and are aware and are proactively trying to tackle.
Yes, I've actually been to a few copper with a copper events in Staveley as well. Definitely really mobilised community who really care about where they live and do raise those concerns. It's quite interesting. I was just flicking through the cards because the first 4 questions have had drugs as a theme, really. And I can't help but, I don't want to jump to conclusions, but the first 4 questions have been centred around that. And I wonder whether residents feel that when it comes to bringing offenders to justice in this space around drug dealing, substance misuse, and the impacts of that to the community, it seems to them that it's a far greater challenge maybe than any other scenario. And I'm not sure why that is, but obviously every scenario is very, very different in terms of the questions we've asked. But it seems like there's a bit of a trend from the selection of questions around. The next question I've just had a glance at also mentions drugs, but in a different way. Yeah. But it seems like that's...
And it's interesting because
there's
actually...
a feeling of that.
If you looked at drugs offences, we deal with an awful lot of drugs offences, proactively and get good outcomes with it. But there's a disconnect between thinking that there's action versus the action that we've taken, which, is a theme we've talked about before in terms of needing people to look at, Derbyshire Alert, forming part of that, and looking at our social media. Yeah. Because, very much talking with our head of comms and Donna about putting more live results out there so people can see what we're doing.
Yes. No, I think, and that's definitely something we do talk about and have spoken about before on this platform. So if people aren't following Derbyshire Alerts, please to sign up to that for any updates. The Force have, I believe, a Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok as well. So there are various ways that people can stay engaged or updated or indeed get in touch in all the traditional ways, whether that's by phone or online. There's a DigiDesk. There are so many ways now that I think even since I've started this role that we've continued, to build on and include. So I do think there are many ways to keep in touch. But if residents at this point want to suggest any other ways that we should be keeping in touch with the public that we aren't already doing, please do write in to my office or indeed the force, and we'll definitely take that on board.
And I'm going to plug the DigiHub. So
Yes.
it's staffed 24/7. So if you make digital contact with us, it's not a bot at the other end of it. It's a real person who will be there to answer your questions and your queries and deal with what you're calling us about or contact us about.
Okay. No, thank you. So question 5 is from a resident who lives in Derby City. Are the same number or more offenders being arrested since the specialised squads, such as the Drugs Squad and Stolen Vehicle Investigation Unit, have been closed in this force?
So it is many, many years since there was a specialist drug squad and vehicle squad within the force. So it's really hard to compare figures. But I think some of the things I've talked about already should give residents a sense that we deal with things differently. So we did just have a specialist drug squad, but actually things have very much changed. So we now have teams who do tackle drugs, such as the organised crime gang unit, the OCG unit, who it's not all about drugs gangs, but there is a big element within that. We also have county lines teams. Again, county lines is reference to drugs, county line supply. So teams who are very much specifically tackling this. So whilst it's not a specialist drug squad as was, very much different ways in which we work. And we work, as you know, with East Midlands Serious and Organised Crime Unit, who help us deal with higher level criminality and use more specialist assets to come and tackle drugs that are coming into the county. In terms of vehicle crimes, vehicle crime has substantially declined over the last 10 years. We still do targeted operations around this. And we've got neighbourhood acquisitive crime teams who they focus on burglary, but they're also within their remit as vehicle crime. So I don't want anybody to think that that's not on our agenda anymore.
Okay, so it sounds like we're just doing things differently. But from their perspective, I guess the question was, are more offenders being arrested? So has the change in tact and how we do things made things better?
I think it's different things because vehicles used to be a lot easier to steal.
Yeah.
So vehicle crime has dropped.
Yes.
So you're going to have less people arrested for it.
Yeah.
So I think it's quite hard to compare the two,
Okay.
is where I would say. But my point would be, we still arrest people for it, we still bring people to justice, and we still deal with these issues.
Okay. No, thank you for that. So question 6. Question 6 is from a resident in Amber Valley. How can the force work better with the CPS, the courts, and others to improve the conviction rate for rape and other serious offences?
We would, love to have a better conviction rate at court for rape and serious sexual offences. I think I speak on behalf of all of policing when we say that. And it is a priority for policing. It is a priority for Derbyshire. We work really closely with the Crown Prosecution Service and, other partners in order to tackle and more effectively deal with rape and serious sexual offences. We have actually in Derbyshire some of the best conviction rates in the country for those types of offences, but it's still way lower than anyone would want it to be. So this has been a push nationally, and all forces have been doing a lot of work under, it's called the umbrella, it's called Opsoteria. And this is really around working with partners, but absolutely putting the victim at heart of it. Because I think victims would say that in previous times, they've been made to feel that they need to protect themselves, whereas actually we're saying we go after the perpetrator and we really protect the victim. That's where we are. And it's a real shift in terms of how we deal with those offences. We will carry on relentlessly trying to improve the conviction rate with that and to tackle those perpetrators who undertake some of those most serious offences within our communities. And whilst the outcomes are not always where they want us to be or where we'd want to be, when we don't get a conviction at court, we always sit down for these types of offences. We always sit down with CPS and work out why.
Okay. So in terms of how can we work better, you would be saying that we have a strong relationship with the CPS so that the public are aware, and that wherever we don't get the outcome that the victim would have wanted, we make sure that we are reflecting and looking at that and understanding why that is.
And it is somewhere where we will carry on pursuing.
Okay. Because it's something that I think, like you say, is it's a national challenge across the board, and it's such a sensitive space as well.
Yes,
because
it's such a very personal crime.
Yes.
And it has such a long impact on the victim.
Yes.
That absolutely is a priority for policing. And that's why I say we need to relentlessly carry on improving this area.
I guess before I move on to the next one, where residents feel that, I know we have commission services in place as well, so we always try and work with victims to ensure that they have the support that they need. And would this be where witness care comes into place for the force as well, in terms of that added support throughout what can be a really challenging time?
Yes, and particularly for rape offences, it can be a significant amount of time before a court date, and that is where those services come in, because that's such a long time for the victim to not get to any sort of conclusion. And so keep supporting them, helping them throughout. That is, whilst they'll have contact with the officer in case, of course, that sort of witness and victim support service is vital in terms of helping them throughout that really difficult period.
No, thank you. We have another question from Derby City. Does the Chief Constable have any plans to extend the scope/use of restorative justice as a resolution for some groups of crime?
Yeah. So absolutely, in the right circumstances, the use of an out-of-court disposal, of which restorative justice is one option, is really a good way to deliver a good outcome for the victim, and a swift outcome for the victim usually, whilst at the same time reducing the likelihood of the person reoffending. And we are constantly looking at different ways of improving the way in which we do it already, but also are there other things that we can pursue with it for a wider range of offences. So in May this year, we established our out-of-court resolution hub, and we've got that to ensure that there's a consistent approach taken across the crime types and if the circumstances apply, so that we're making the most use of this as possible. Because I sort of touched on it earlier, we want people to go into the criminal justice system at an appropriate level and an appropriate level of seriousness. And if there's an opportunity to divert or prevent reoffending, I think that's something everybody would want, so that the more serious offences are what's within that route. So, this is something that we use. It is something that we continue to try to develop and use in the circumstances where it is best for both the victim and reduces the likelihood of offending.
Okay. So I guess just to make sure that I don't have another follow-up, just to make sure we've answered this question, in terms of extending that scope from, it's a case by case, really,
well,
it sounds like, or is it?
It's some of them would not be in the right circumstance. So this is why we keep looking at what types of offences are we doing it for? Is there any scope to do it? Sometimes it might need to change in legislation, for example. So,
yes,
we look at what we can and making sure that we're doing it. And if there's opportunity to do more, then we would do if it's right.
Okay. Question 8. This question is from a resident in Erewash. Do you think the criminal justice system is failing the police? Recently, our scheme members helped the police collect information on a local known drug dealer. He only received a 2-year suspended sentence for his offences, and then 6 months later, he is convicted of murder. A stronger system would have saved police man-hours, a person's life, and terrified residents having to endure watching him strutting our streets and carrying on with his drug dealing.
Okay, so, this sounds particularly tragic circumstance here. I mean, we're part of the criminal justice system. Our job is to investigate, gather the evidence, take it through to CPS, who then take it through to court for us, and throughout we support victims and bring offenders to justice. Sentencing, though, remains the domain of the judiciary, and ultimately it's down to them in terms of to make decisions on the information known to them. As I said, this sounds particularly tragic course of events. And obviously everybody would wish that this was different. But at this point, we need to do our job in the best that we can to give CPS the best opportunity to take it through to a positive outcome at court. The sentencing sits outside of that.
And it is a challenge, really, because there are some things that sit with our various criminal justice partners. Whilst we all work together and want to work together to make sure that we are supporting victims and bringing offenders to justice, there are certain things that sit outside of that, as you've said. It is a very, very disheartening set of circumstances here, but one that doesn't sit with with policing in terms of sentencing.
Yeah.
But we shall go to the next question. And this one is from Derbyshire Dales. Question 9. I was recently a victim of crime, attempted arson by a neighbour. I chose to not have the perpetrator contacted and the crime pursued. This was for fear of retaliation. What is or can be done to protect victims from reporting a crime with fear of retaliation?
Yeah, so we do recognise that often people might live in close proximity, have a relationship with of some sort with the offender, and it is then very difficult for them. So where a crime is reported and a suspect is identified, the officers carry out an assessment to identify if there's any risks, and then we implement a plan around that to try to manage those risks. So, for example, in this instance, we would consider how can we best safeguard that property. So it might be putting bail conditions on the suspect, for example, not to go near someone if they've been arrested. We can do something which we call target hardening addresses. So consider CCTV, other security measures. In this instance, for example, we might engage with partners such as the fire service or the local council to make some additional security measures. But, such as in an arson, you can put sort of a fireproof letterbox, for example, things like that to make the house safer. So it's just really to give some reassurance. We do assess and then look at what can we do and what can we work with others to protect that victim, because it is really difficult, something to do and report, and people will feel that fear when they're reporting something nearby to others.
So in the event that anything else happens with this resident, then to please report, because there are things definitely.
And really probably, this is clearly a concern that someone had. And I just said that if the person posing the question wants any help or advice, if they would like to contact their Safer Neighbourhood team to discuss it, then we'll be really happy to discuss that.
Thank you. Question 10. Despite Ilkeston Marketplace having a designated PSPO there has been an alarming amount of drinking leading to antisocial behaviour. Sadly, many of the perpetrators appear to be unemployed and consequently have little else to do. They can misbehave knowing there is little or no police presence at times, and it's becoming uncomfortable to walk through the marketplace even in mid-afternoon.
Excuse me. So this is something the Ilkeston Safer Neighbourhood team are aware of, and I am aware of. There's a patrol strategy in place so that it's been part of the Safer Streets Summer Initiative, but it will continue, past summer. The Safer Neighbourhood team will be visible there on a regular basis, and they will patrol there. But as part of those patrols, they're also making sure that 2 officers will be on foot patrol in those specific locations for a minimum of 2 hours every day at key times. So, because there's no point us being there at 8 o'clock in the morning if nobody's there. But at the key times that we know it's really busy, there will be a foot presence in addition to the wider presence that the neighbourhood team would bring. This is further supported by our hotspot patrol strategy, where you have dedicated officers from across the force who go and spend certain times in key locations, which maximises visibility, engagement and feelings of confidence from seeing that visible presence. So they will be in addition to what the neighbourhood teams are doing. Since the start of July, though, the officers at Ilkeston have issued 28 PSPO warnings, 3 fixed penalty notices for breaching the terms of PSPO. And I just need to note that there is a strict process that must be followed, which involves, for the breach of the PSPO, warning first on every occasion. So it's not a case somebody turns up, we need to warn them, go away and come back again. So we need to make sure we do that. And on many of those occasions, the officers have either seized alcohols from people responsible, or the people with the alcohol have poured the alcohol away for themselves prior to our attendance there. So really some reassurance that try to use the PSPO effectively, because there was a reason for getting it in the first place. Safer Neighbourhood teams are committed to making sure there is that visible presence, adding to the feeling of safety. There is definite partnership working in that location. And on top of that, we put the hotspot patrols that we're provided from elsewhere across the force.
No, thank you. I think we're actually coming to our last question. And this question comes from a resident in High Peak. Mostly offenders feel they can get away with crime because the police are not visible. How can visibility be increased?
So I've talked about visibility quite a lot throughout this today. And also I would recognise that in some parts of the county, particularly in High Peak and, in the Dales, visibility can be harder where the geography's quite big. So, but we do recognise that seeing a police present has a really big effect in terms of feelings of competence and feelings of safety. So we have a series of targeted patrols, as I've talked about, for areas that are experiencing high level of antisocial behaviour. So we look at reports that we have in terms to choose those locations so that we know that we're picking those with the highest concerns and the highest levels of reported ASB. The patrols are not random. They're informed by a thorough analysis of what's going on in the force, and it allows us to identify the right locations at the right time in order to deploy our resources. So it's intelligence-led. It means the officers and staff are there where they needed to be, at the times they need to be, and it increases visibility and engagement within the community. And we have seen huge engagement through those Op Shango patrols. Lots of people come up and speak to us. It's really good and reassuring for people as well. So it just doesn't just disrupt behaviour, it actually strengthens engagements and feelings of competence that people have within us. So in addition to that as well, we work closely with partners and other community groups to try to share information about what we're doing, because just because you don't happen to be there at the time that we are actually there as well, there are other ways that we need to get the message out to say, well, these are what we're doing in your location, and this is how we are visible in your location, and this is how we're tackling the problems in your location. And it is a theme that comes up time and time again, is making sure that we continue to feedback what we're doing. And, when there's very specific local issues, engaging with your Safer Neighbourhood team, because they really can tell you what they've been doing to tackle those problems in your communities.
Okay. No, thank you. This was the last question from our residents. I wanted to say thank you very much for joining us again to answer these questions. To all the residents who have tuned in, we do a detailed report where I scrutinise and look at the work that the Chief Constable and the force are doing on each priority. This time it was bringing offenders to justice. So for the detailed report, you can access that on our website. This is the podcast version for you to be able to put your questions to the Chief, which we have done, and also obviously receive the update that we heard from Assistant Chief Constable James Abdi. So thank you very much for tuning in today. We really appreciate all the questions that you have submitted and your time. If you have any further questions for myself or the Chief, please do get in touch with myself at the OPCC office, and indeed the Chief Constable at Derbyshire Constabulary. From me to you, thank you very much.